When I was about 5 years old, we moved into this house. And previously, there had been no story about any type of haunting or any type of anything, no paranormal activity that anybody knew of. My brother, who shared a room with me, was really the first to experience anything, what we would call anything that's paranormal. The first encounter he had with this image that was dark and menacing and had piercing red eyes. That became the beginning of a 6-year odyssey. We had everything but blood dripping from walls, coming out of water. We had these brief possessions and exorcisms, requests by, a direct request to the Vatican for a very full-fledged exorcism. Priests trying to come in, they get tossed around rooms, you name it. It really was all that. It was all that and more.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Franco Romero with us on the show today. Franco's a clairvoyant, spiritual teacher, and mystical shaman. He had a near-death experience as a 6-month-old and channels a collective consciousness called Caleb. Now, I'm interested to learn more about how somebody remembers an NDE that happened when they were an infant and how this information can help us live a wonderful life here on Earth. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now, let's go talk with Franco. Franco, I'm so thrilled that you could join us today. Thank you for taking the time.
Julie, it is my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my honor. You had an NDE when you were 6 months old. What happened, and how the heck do you remember something from when you were 6 months old?
Well, great question. And I'll start it off by answering that second piece first. Okay. In the grand scheme of things, there, as you probably know from everything that you do, there's no real such thing as a linear timeline. So the ability to actually recollect something is easier when you understand that everything's happening all the time. Now, back when I remembered, I didn't know all that. Okay, I mean, I was 15 when I started to have these dreams and visions of this recurring story that was happening in my life, and it felt like it was actually happening in my life. I mean, even though I was having these events occurring that seemed to be in the quote unquote past, I still felt like it was happening in real time for me, because every single time that I would have these, especially when I was having dreams at night, I would always wake up the same way. I would always wake up like as if I were having had the event, and I was sweating and I was crying, and I was like, but this thing didn't happen at that time. It was happening in this thing we call the past, 15 years earlier. So that's sort of the short-winded way of saying that I was experiencing those things in dreams and visions as though they were happening to me real time. And so in the process of all that, these events didn't just happen once. They happened multiple times. And at first, well, I was used to having lucid dreams as a kid.
So tell people that don't know what that is, Franco. What's a lucid dream?
Well, first of all, you can keep calling me Franco every day of the week. Okay, I just love that. Okay, so thank you. A lucid dream is when there are levels to lucid dreaming, but it's basically where you are aware that you are having a dream, and to what extent are you manipulating that dream? Are you aware enough that you can move the dream, change the narrative, completely move yourself out of it and wake yourself up? Sometimes you'll wake yourself up into another dream. And then you are aware that you're in that dream and you move yourself out of it. So it's the ability to feel a sense of awareness that you are actually in a dream and that you can control it. And to what extent is where the multiple levels of lucidness come in.
I have heard of people that are having like what we would call a bad dream, and then they wake up and then they go back to sleep, and then they go back into that same dream and they change the outcome. Is
Yep.
that considered a lucid dream as well?
Yeah,
Is
in
that
fact, that's
considered like a continuous lucid dream?
yeah, that's actually a really interesting and fascinating sort of the aspect of a lucid dream, because when somebody can actually wake themselves out, or whether they wake themselves or just a bad dream woke them up, the ability to go back into the dream is a facet of that lucidness that is really fast. That's not an easy thing to do. If you get in your own way, you won't be able to do it. But if you're allowing it to just sort of happen playfully, intentionally, you can jump back into the same dream. I have done that many times, even
I
now
have
in my.
too, but I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it had a name.
Yeah,
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 interesting.
and it's just another facet, and it's a more sophisticated facet of lucid dreaming, because you're actually aware enough to know that you have the ability to control that aspect of your remembrance. And I call it a remembrance because the way I look at dreaming, okay, so we're going to digress just a moment. The way that I look at dreaming is that dreaming, in many regards, is a glimpse into some of the parallel realities that you are existing in. And so you are literally you are really controlling the way in which you bridge those two worlds together. Again, that's not typically an easy thing to do, but if you don't feel into it too much, you can make it happen pretty easily. And that's a different form of lucid dreaming. Not really different, it's just a different aspect of it.
Does that go along with we can control our thoughts even in our dreams?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
It
Cool.
absolutely is, because it's in the thought process of those dreams that you can change the narrative, and that kinda gets into how this reality works, how this dream state, the one that we call the awakened state of our physical self, that's how that works, is if you can. And this is where, I tell people, I suppose it was an advantage to me that I had the sense of or ability to have lucid dreams without even knowing I was having them. I was a kid most of the time. When I had them back then, it was different for me. The experience was, "Oh, gee, everybody has this, everybody gets to jump around in their dreams." And so for me, I didn't question it. And so, when you understand what you're doing in that dream, it is 100% applicable to this dream that we call life, this thing we call the awakened state of reality, which it really isn't. It's kind of a dream state in and of itself. In the book, I wrote about a chapter about this, about the dream states, and how they apply both to your sleep state physically, and how they apply to your spiritual state of dreaming, which is what we're doing right now.
So back to the 6-month
Oh
NDE.
yes, we were
Tell
talking
us about
about
that.
that.
We went down a rabbit hole, and that was all due to me driving us down the rabbit hole. So back to the 6-month NDE.
Yeah, so I was in a hospital setting. I saw it was kind of the way that most people talk about their NDEs. I was there, but I was invisible. I wasn't. Nobody could see me or know that I was there. It was kind of like I was looking at a rerun of an event that had happened. And so she was concerned that I had pneumonia or bronchitis or something, and she saw that my situation was getting better. It was getting worse than better. So she took me to the doctor. It was kind of like a clinic/hospital, and they decided to keep me there for observation. And in the time that I was there, things went south pretty fast. And so within just a couple of hours, I went from being in bad shape to being in really bad, worse shape. And my organs were shutting down, and they went from, we want to keep him for observation to, can we provide you with a chaplain or a minister or priest to console the family, because your baby's going to die. It won't make it through the night. And so that's kind of where I jumped into the dream. Where in the dream I was in that part where she's sitting there and she's, beside herself, with emotion, and then the doctors come in and they give her the news. They come to the doorway. They ask her if she could speak with them, and so she comes out. I'm walking, I'm drifting next to her, and I'm always on her right side, and they're telling her the story. They're telling her there's nothing they could do. Um, and they're providing the services of the chaplain, and should you get your family here, and those things. And I remember feeling into all of her energy, like feeling how she just at that moment checked out. She just was like, to her it was just like wah 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 kind of a thing. And and how she went back into the room, stone cold, because of the news, grabbed her things, her belongings, and walked out of the hospital, kind of surprising a lot of people, because you just hear the news and you would assume, yes, of course, you'd want to be by your baby's side and so on. And she went to a nearby church, that she had been going to before, and that church, when she got, say, about like a city block away from that church, it was on a boulevard, so it was like at the end of a boulevard, and she could see it from where she was walking. She got on her knees and crawled, to the church, and and um, and that was, I guess, really customary, at least where I was from. This was in South America, and they were very devout, and so this kind of a
Well,
thing
that's
was,
the Camino, the Camino that people walk, and then they get to the St. James Basilica, and they walk on their knees
yeah,
into that. That's
yeah.
very ancient.
It's very
Yeah,
ancient. It's very
yeah.
ancient, and the camino in Spanish is the walk. It's the walkway. So, so she's
I have
doing it.
whole I have whole body goosebumps with you telling this
I haven't
story.
even got started yet,
I
Julie.
know, but the part where she was a block from the church and she got on her knees and started walking, my whole body just went like, lit up. All right,
Lit
go
up.
ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, the 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 sensory thing was really huge for me because the emotions that I was experiencing were all entirely hers. I wasn't feeling sorrow or grief for her. I was feeling sorrow and grief because of her. I was like really, I was her in a way. Okay, and I understand that I understand that now from a different perspective with what I do these days. But at the time, I was just like, well, this is really wild. Okay, this I'm 15 years old, remember, and I'm just like, this is like I've never had a dream like this before. And she spent a fair amount of time at the altar. But here again, as I talk about this a bit in my book, that it was the energy that she was emoting that was different. It was really different. She was emoting an energy that wasn't based on really, I said it was just, grief and sorrow, but it wasn't really grief and sorrow. It was there was a sense of gratitude and appreciation that she had. It was like she was so profoundly felt so profoundly blessed to have had the 6 months with me, that all she could do was just in her prayer, it was just thank you, thank you, thank you for the 6 months that I had with this baby, for touching it, holding it, being its mother, experiencing the joy of all that. Thank you. It wasn't please, 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 save my baby. It was such a beautiful, profoundly touching feeling, that I couldn't really at the time understand it very well, much less appreciate it. But it was so incredible. I could feel the air, the energy in the church. It was dancing around that energy. It was really touched by that energy. Okay, and and so this went on for a little bit, and then I sensed this change in the energy around her, and at that moment she had this vision come to her of what my life, would have looked like had I lived, so that she had a chance to see me grow up. She had a chance to see me become the man that I would have been, and the father that I would have been, and the son that I would have been, all that. And again, she was flooded with this emotional sense of gratitude for the opportunity to have glimpsed into my life, in a way that she thought she would never see. And that gratitude and appreciation, that joy of being able to experience seeing me in her dream, in her visions, as an adult, was so strong in her, that she broke down and started crying. And at that moment, again, all gratitude, all appreciation. At that moment, the energy again shifted in the church. And again, for me, I was like, I'm very comfortable now about energy, but I didn't know what was going on at the time. Why was I so preoccupied with the energy around her and how it was shifting? And And sure enough, at that moment, she started sensing this enormous feeling of peace. And at that moment, she realized that something had happened, but she didn't know what. And so she got up, got her things, and walked out of the church and went over to the hospital again. And at that time, she was fully expecting that she was going to run into the doctors and family members, and that they were going to give her the news, the bad news. And so when she got there, everybody was crying and meeting, basically standing there at the doorway waiting for her. And so she was expecting that, but instead, the doctors came up to her and they told her that over the small period of time that she was gone, there had been a miracle, and that the miracle was that my organs came back online. Um, all the bronchitis or symptomatic things of this chest cold or whatever that was going on, it was all changed. It all changed in just a short period of time. Everything was coming back. And as they did back then, and especially even today, they just kind of wrote it off as kind of a medical miracle, and nobody really talked about it much more beyond that. They didn't understand it, but they figured something had happened, and it was done. And so she took me back home the next day, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't gotten that close to dying, because at the time that she was gone, they basically said I had hit rock bottom. They were basically expecting me to pass on within moments, and it didn't happen. It just jumped back up. Everything came back up.
Did you have any experience of yourself as a 6-month-old? Did you die? Did you come back? Did you stop breathing? Did any of that come to the surface?
Yeah. So what had happened was that the second aspect of my vision or dream was where I found myself in the same room again, but this time I was really drawn to the baby, which was me. And so at that moment, the same kind of funny thing, it's kind of like in a movie where you see like the same thing happening, but from different camera perspectives, sort of. So in this particular case, I felt into the energy of me as the baby. And at one moment, I could see my mother walking out of the room and doing her thing with the doctors and coming back and leaving. But then almost after that, I felt this feeling of being drawn out of the baby's body, even though I wasn't quite there in it, but I felt like I was being pulled up. And the next thing I know, I'm like levitating, if you will, above this room. And I see everybody that's doing the same thing before. My mom's no longer there. And I feel sort of this essence or this energy sort of above me, like where the ceiling would be. And it was really not all that different than the ceiling, but it got really dark. It got like pitch dark all of a sudden. And this all happened in the span of a few moments, but it went from pitch dark to all of a sudden this light shines up again. And the very, very first thing I remember feeling into was why isn't this light hurting my eyes? Because back when you're a kid, and even now, you look at the sun and you're like, you kind of get blinded by it, right? Um, I wasn't getting blinded by it, but yet this orb was easily 5, 10 times bigger than what I would have viewed the sun to be. And I realized at that point that this was something way beyond any experience that I was having, that I could have been having as a physical self. Okay, so I went into this light, and it consumed me. It went through me, and it rattled every cell in my body, in what I thought was my body. Every cell in my body was vibrating like uncontrollably, but it was good. It was a really good vibration. And when it finally integrated completely into me, it felt like every cell in my body had an awareness of itself. And when that whole integration process ended, I was in this big, massive space of light. And I remember there were beings, like, it went on forever. There were beings like way, way, way out there. And so at that moment, these four beings, these 3, 4 beings come up to me, and they surround me. And I knew immediately that they were light beings. There was no defined characteristic of them, no facial characteristic, no nothing. But But what was interesting is that I knew them. I knew them as different from the others. And so they hugged me. They hugged me. And when they hugged me, I blew up. I exploded into everything. I began to feel this, I describe it as a million hugs. But it really wasn't a million hugs. It was way beyond a million hugs. But I felt this aspect of me just explode into everything. I was everything in that space. I was everything. I understood everything. I could understand the beginnings of everything, the ends of everything. I saw beginnings of lives, ends of life. I experienced them as if I had had them. It wasn't my life. It was all life. It was all life. Um, it was it was indescribable for the most of my life until now recently, where I've been able to have some similar types of experiences through channeling that I remember what that was like, and more specifically what it had happened during that near death experience. And next thing I knew, I was being whisked back, like an extraordinary speed, through a tunnel of light. And I like this happened many, many times. I would find myself crash landing onto my bed in now 15 years later, in a pool of sweat, and literally disoriented. Every single time. It didn't matter that I had done it the first time or the 15th time. I was always disoriented. I couldn't remember for a moment where I was. And then I realized I was back. I was back. I didn't know what that meant. Back then there was nobody talking about this stuff, so I had no idea what it meant. But I knew I was back, and I knew that I didn't want to be here. I wanted to be back there again, and the immediate rush of emotions behind that, knowing that I had left something that to me felt way more like home than anywhere else. And so then I had to confront my mother and ask her, what was this all about? I mean, my first question to her was, did this actually occur? I mean, because I keep getting this dream and you're in it. And when I told her, her mouth just dropped. She had to sit down and because she was probably going to pass out. And she said, what you're describing, how you're describing it, especially the version that had to do with her, she said, no one knew the exact details of that. No one knew about what happened in the church, what I was doing in the church. No one. She goes, what you're describing is a miracle. And up until that time, her version of the miracle was the fact that I survived that night. But now she had realized that something even bigger had happened, or as big had happened. So at the time, she wanted me to share this with people. Go to the church, talk to the priest, tell them all about it. And I had already, like I had mentioned, I had already lived in the house of hauntings, and my siblings had tried that approach, and it didn't fare very well. So there was no way in heck that I was going to tell anybody about any of this. I was still trying to figure out what it all meant, much less me sharing it with somebody. Um, I realized that entity was, it was with me, but it was an aspect of me in a variety of different frequencies of what I would call my higher self, and it integrated with me very early on, literally from the time that I was 6 months old until now, which is why some people are often like, and we were talking about this off camera, which is some people ask, do they talk? Do they talk? It's a they. It's not a singular thing. It's a variety of different frequencies that come through, and I'm like, yeah, they're constantly talking. I mean, I'm literally talking. The reason I have these chat things that I do on YouTube where I talk about, you ask me any question and I'll answer it for the most part. At least I do my best. I can't answer how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop, but I can typically answer most other things. And that's a secret that nobody knows. The world will never know that one. Okay. But I can typically do that because instantaneously I integrate with that aspect of intelligence that we all have, and that we are, and it is what it is. This is why I do what I do. And so
Yeah,
so
I wanna get into that in depth here in a minute.
okay.
First, whenever I'm working with somebody and their loved one or another spirit comes in, they're always on the right side. If you listen to one of my shows and it'll be somebody wanting to talk to their dead grandmother or their dead dog or whoever, and I'll say, "Okay, grandma's right there on your right." They always come in to the right. So you're the first person, Franco, that I've ever heard say, "It's always on the right." For me,
Come on
that's what I
now,
see too.
seriously?
Yeah, yeah, and if it's I was talking with somebody this morning, with a client this morning, and we were talking to her grandparents and then her parents, and it's been my experience doing this tens of thousands of times where the the first person they mention shows up on the right, the second one's on the left, and then and then they'll be right, left, and they go out and they come in as my client or my caller into my show mentions them. So they'll say my Meemaw or my dog Fluffy, and then they come in that order because it's been my experience too that once we think of a spirit, a loved one or Elvis or whomever, it doesn't really matter if we even knew them. You live near Prince's house. Prince, we
Well,
could think of
I'm
Prince.
actually a hop, skip, and a jump from Paisley Park, so
There you go.
I
I've
feel
been
into his energies a lot.
Yeah. So
So
you think of him and he immediately comes in because our heads are like big satellite dishes. Okay. You've mentioned a couple of times that you lived in a house with hauntings. You can't just say that and then just move on willy-nilly here.
most people
You've
don't care
gotta
to hear about that. Do you
well,
know
yeah,
that?
yeah, well, yeah, but I care. What
Yeah, most
hauntings
people are
like
going haunting
like people that
schmaltzies, who
people
cares?
that lived in the house before or your dead relatives or who were the spirits that you were seeing?
So that's an interesting story, Julie. Okay. Okay. So here we go. Okay. Um, so w- the way that the way that we operate is that we have we contain all of these energetic signatures codes. Okay. And and this is not applicable just to children, but children tend to have the ability to have these codes relatively active, and we call those codes. I've been told that those codes are what we often refer as to the shine. Okay, and like in The Shining. Okay, and um, and so if anybody ever seen that movie, it's kind of a kind of a head twister, okay, mind twister, and it's not really that scary, but it just does something to you. And so if you ever notice in the movie, and I'm not giving anything away, but if people haven't seen it, but in the movie, the focus is primarily on the main character, okay, and very little is discussed about the boy in the movie when in all actuality, and the book is a little bit better about this, but the actual main character of the story is the boy. The boy has the shine, and the shine is this light body codes of energy, the beautiful energy that it has that is that comes from the highest levels of source. Okay, and we carry them. We all carry them, but children have the shine. They just can't completely have the shine for the most part. So in the movie, just to make this really short and sweet, and because it has relevance to my story, is that the little boy activated the hotel, and then everything gets a little bit wacky patacky after that. Now I'll leave it at that for anybody who wants to watch the movie. Okay. In the same similar fashion, when I was about 5 years old, we moved into this house. And previously, there had been no story about any type of haunting or any type of anything, no paranormal activity that anybody knew of. Um, but pretty soon after we moved in, things got pretty wild, pretty fast. Um, my brother, who shared a room with me, was really the first to experience anything, what we would call anything that's paranormal. What he experienced, and I describe this in my book again, is that he experienced the first encounter he had with this image that was dark and menacing and had piercing red eyes. Okay, and um, and he woke up everybody in the house. Okay, he woke up everybody, and And of course, like in the movies, lights turn on, they look into the porch, there's nobody there. What are you doing? What are you talking about? Go back to sleep. And as I described it, that became the beginning of a 6-year odyssey, because we had everything but blood dripping from walls coming out of water. We had these brief possessions that would happen where somebody in my family would start to speak in a different tone or even a different tongue, and they would walk around literally like a frail old man, and all the people chasing each other with knives, and and exorcisms, requests by a direct request to the Vatican for a very full-fledged exorcism. Priests trying to come in, they get tossed around rooms, you name it. It really was, it was all that. It was all that and more, okay? And what was really interesting, I look back at it now, and what was really interesting, I talk about this quite a bit. There was this moment, years into this whole thing, and you sit there in a movie, right? And you sit there in the movie and you go, what are you doing here? Get out of the house, girlfriend, get out of the house, go leave, right? You're like, why are you there? And I don't have an answer to that because I was only 5, 6, 7 years old, so I had really little say in terms of whether we were going to leave or not. But so this went on for years, and finally we left. And that energy kind of followed us for a little bit, but I came to find out that house, there had been some history in that house. And the history was that when it was first built, because it was built like just before the 1900s, that house had been occupied by a gentleman who had a daughter, and she had she had the shine, okay, not all that different from what I had as a child. And so she activated the house. And when she activated the house became a pathway, a pathway between this world and the world where they were trying to go. She was the go-between. She was the shine. That's what the shine is. The shine is the ability to use yourself as the entryway, as the portal into the other dimensions, in order for people to pass on. And so to put a bow on that story, it just a few years ago, I went back to that house, and it was still as creepy as it ever has been. And and nobody seemed to be living there. What a shocker. Okay. And I spent a couple of nights outside. There was like this little breezeway or something you can kind of hang out. We used to do it when we were kids, so I knew where it was. And I allowed myself to serve as the gateway for these entities, because they were still there, even though they weren't present to whomever left or whomever came afterwards. And what it turned out was that when I did that, it allowed me to see them in their purest light. And this is where I don't do a lot of paranormal stuff in what I do these days, but I completely understand that the reason why a lot of that energy seems quote unquote demonic is because imagine yourself being stuck between dimensions, and you can't communicate with anybody about this. And day after day, week after week, month after month, these beautiful shines come into that house, and there is no way to communicate that you are desperately trying to get through to the other side. Eventually, you go crazy. You go mad. Because you're doing everything you possibly can to be able to get the attention of whomever can hear or feel you. And so when I realized that was the case, I went into a frequency that of just allowing myself. I do some sacred geometrical things, and I knew how to put myself in the center of the circle and allow them one by one to come through me. And when they came through me, and when they appeared to me as that man, the girl that had killed herself, hung herself. It came through as a family of 4, two girls and a man and a daughter who had died in some sort of boating accident. There was some elderly lady there. They were beautiful. They were sweet. They were tender, because for the first time ever, I was able to match up with their true frequency. And one by one, they walked through me and went into the light. And that was it. The house was cleansed.
Nothing demonic about it.
Nothing
People
at
get
all.
afraid and then they perceive it, like you said, based on the movies and the representations of spirit that people are so afraid of. And it's
Yep.
all them interpreting through fear. I always say all spirits are pure love. All right. So I've got to ask you, you're 15, you're seeing all these spirits, you've seen them in the haunted house, you've seen them really for most of your life at this point. You get out of high school. Did you go to work in a grocery store? Did you start doing woo-woo stuff? I mean, where do you
No,
take
no, but I
that?
did,
And
funny enough, I did work at a grocery store, okay?
that
But
must be psychic or something, Franco.
so so but I didn't do any woo-woo stuff. I mean, I didn't do any intentional woo-woo stuff.
So how did you get from the grocery store to doing woo-woo in
It
your
was
current life?
it was a series of events,
Give us the clip notes.
the cliff note was that, one of the most defining event, I'll give you the cliff note of that, is that I was, fast forward about 10 years later, but there were things that had already happened before this, but I was just in absolute denial. Fast forward about 10 years after, no, about almost 15 years after these series of dreams and stuff. And long story made short, my son, who was 2.5 at the time, 2.5 at the time, ran across the lanes,
Like at
and
the drop off or
yeah, and the
the
drop off and
arrival?
in the pickup. And so my son, he let go of my wife's hand and ran across because he saw me. And then there were all these cars coming. They were coming at a pretty good clip. And at that moment, I had this experience, an out of body experience, where I literally left in a state of horror. I left my body, and I found myself. I started screaming, no, just at the top of my lungs. I didn't know if that was going to do anything, but it was just the reaction I was getting, and I felt. And I described this in the book because it's very, very relevant to what I do with how I try to get people to tap into their abilities. Okay, is that I went deep within myself, didn't know that I was really aware that I was doing it. I did, but I didn't. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. I went deep within myself, and then I shouted out no, and a vibration that literally, it literally rippled throughout the airport. And I mean that because what happened at that moment was that the airport, all of it, the structure, the people, the cars, the airplanes, they all went like this, a wave. And I was sitting there, and it's like put a sheet out on a summer day and watch it just blow in the wind. Okay, it was like that. It was like somebody had put a sheet. It was a very three-dimensional sheet because it was everywhere, and everything was being projected on it, and everything stopped. It stopped. Even the noise stopped. Everything stopped for about 5, maybe 6 seconds. It stopped, but it was more than enough time to sit there and like in the movies go, what the hell is happening here? Okay. Like this is really odd. Everything just stopped. And so he easily crossed the street without being hit. And then everything came back. And what was really wild, I mean, if that wasn't enough wild, okay, it was the fact that I'm sitting there and I'm looking around, and nobody even remotely knew what had happened. I mean, I screamed, and I'm telling you, it would have been heard miles away. Okay. But everybody just went back to being what they were doing. It was like nothing had happened. And so that was such an impactful event. There were others and big ones too, but that was such an impactful event because as I describe it that it was the moment that I had the chance to peek into the other side of the veil. It was the opportunity that I got to see the operational piece of the simulation of this game. I didn't know it at the time, but it stuck with me forever. And later on, I pulled the pieces together. But that was my real big moment where my life couldn't go back. Just couldn't go back. And so I spent that decade and the decade after that still fighting it, still having this introduction with Caleb and the voice and stuff, and still having these bizarre events happening. I mean, I've had many STEs, so many spiritually transformative exams. I mean, I have so many because the way I describe it, I'm a knucklehead, right? I couldn't get the first hint. I didn't want to accept what was happening. But as in 2010, I had an extraordinary, let's call it awakening, a remembrance. I refer to them, and it was at that time that that this relationship with Caleb began. Really full blast
So
became.
tell us who Caleb is.
So the easiest way to describe Caleb is that Caleb is a consciousness, right? Everybody talks about, okay, it's a collective conscious, a collective, and and that collective piece is really intentional here because I never told you what it was.
What do you mean by collective?
I often talk about how in that analogy of the ocean and the droplets, and I tell people, though that does make sense, remember that the ocean cannot exist without the droplets, but the droplets can exist without the ocean. And so that concept of the idea that we as beings, spiritual beings, came together to form a collective um, was what ultimately took me on this massive remembrance of so many other things about the multidimensional world that was part of my awakening back, or my remembrance back in 2009. So Caleb is that collective. Caleb is, if you look at yourself and you are standing in the harbor at New York, and I'm in the harbor in at the UK, somewhere in the UK. It's the same ocean of collective beings. I'm just tapping into one side of it, and others are tapping into other sides of it, but it's still the collective. It's still part of the same consciousness, stream of consciousness, but individually identifying itself through various forms of itself, if that makes sense.
So why does the collective call itself Caleb? Is it so that you are better able to at least have a frame of reference from a human perspective?
That's exactly it. But I mean, that's it. I mean, if I had a mic, I would drop it right now because that was it. Because I actually, when I went to write the book, I did not have a name for them, and I said, you know what, it would help the reader, the person who's reading this, if I could humanize this experience a little bit. Could I have a name for you? And they said, we'll get back to you. And and then they came back and they said, you can call us Caleb. I didn't know the reference to Caleb, but I felt intuitively to do a little digging, and intuitively I just went to the source that I kind of relied on growing up, which was more of a biblical background source. So I thought, well, let me just check and see if there's any real reference to a Caleb. And it turns out that there's very little to no references to Caleb. I mean, it sounds like a name that would be like smattered all over the book, okay? But there isn't, except for really one, okay? And even there, it's not really referenced very much, okay? But it's there, okay? And Caleb, Caleb, okay, so Moses, okay, had his counsel, and whenever they did anything, went into the desert or whatever, okay, he always relied on his council of advisors to give him direction. And obviously, people know from all, I'm going to date myself here, okay, but I'm going to say they know, that Joshua was one of them, because if you saw the Charlton Heston 10 Commandments, you know your story right there, okay. So that's why I'm saying I'm dating myself here, okay? Maybe I'm not dating. Maybe I'm just looking at it through Netflix or something in some old version of the movie. But in any event, so most people know of Joshua and the other advisors, but when Moses would make any real serious decision, he would go through his council. The council would would sort of talk about it and then come up with their opinion, give it to him, and then he would run it by his one special advisor. And his special advisor was Caleb.
Caleb.
And very few
Interesting.
people know about Caleb. Now, it turns out that in a past life regression thing that I had done, and also not really formal regression, but just in the past life, going back into my own meditative stuff that I would do, There's a real strong connection for that story and why I found myself in the desert in my near-death experience. So that will have to probably be for another time, but there's always connections to everything. This whole thing is one massive jigsaw puzzle.
That's just a tease.
That's a tease, Julie,
That's a tease, Franco.
You maybe call me back sometime.
Does Caleb have a message for all of us that are watching and listening? Does Caleb have something that they want us to know?
Okay, so as you know, I just to explain a little bit about the way the collective operates through me, and the answer is yes. Okay, now you're not going to get me to roll my eyes and to start talking in a different voice. Okay,
I don't do that either.
Well, you'd be surprised how many people are like, really, you're not going to do that?
Not
Come on.
necessary. Not required.
And so Caleb is integrated with me to the point that I'm constantly 24/7 vibrating in the frequency of them. So, and to the point that it doesn't require me to do anything special. I just literally, as a question is asked, I just immediately in my mind go, and I go, okay,
I do the same thing.
Yep.
I do the same thing.
So, but here's the answer that they want humanity to understand. And they just keep saying it. The time is now. The time is now. They keep, and I've said this in some other interviews, but they're really, 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 really emphasizing that this is it. This is the time that, from a prophecy standpoint, if you want to go that direction, this is the time. This is it. What we're experiencing right now is game time, and that all of us, whether we know it or not, have a unique and very powerful, I'm going to stress that they're saying very powerful, okay, a contribution to make to that process. Nobody is here by accident. They're saying nobody is here by accident. And if somebody, whether it's somebody that's listening to our interview or maybe they're listening but they're not getting that activation, they are here listening to this for a reason. And they're here listening to it not just because we're talking about paranormal and everything, but because you and I are in our moment of being together are activating each other with certain codes. And these codes are integrating with them so that they themselves come to realize that their light, their true light, the one that everybody says be the light, the shine, the light of the world, they are the light of the world. They are the light of the world. This is not, they keep saying that this is not meant to be flowery words. This is the time. And despite all of the rhetoric and despite all of the, they keep saying the false alarms or the way that people feel them as false alarms, false hopes. This is it. This is it. This is the time for us to step up, remember who we are, and be the shine, be the light of the world, be the light of the world, not a light of the world. They keep saying the light of the world. And that will come through in different ways for different people, but it will come through now. It will start to come through now, and it has been coming through now for some time, but it is really going to escalate right now. So that's it.
Why is it escalating now?
Because this game is ending. There's a cycle. There's a cycle to these experiences, to these earth schools, and we have achieved everything that we desired to have achieved. Albeit we almost blew ourselves up a million times trying to do it. And we're doing a gosh darn good thing. We're trying to keep doing it. Okay, we just don't want to stop trying to do it. Okay, but we have reached a point in the way that this version of the school was created that it's done. Like every school, it ends. Every school has its ending and then a new beginning to it. And this school is done. What we came here to remember is now here at our disposal to do that. And that's the part of the ascension. That's the part of remembering who we are so we can ascend into our consciousness to remember who we are as divine beings. So that's why it's ending, because every not, I wouldn't say every, but most school cycles, most from a historical standpoint, most civilizations usually go 8,000 to 12,000 years in this earth school. And then they disappear in some way. They have catastrophic events, floods. They have, asteroids, they blow themselves up. And in the case of Atlantis, they end. They end, and those who are here to ascend, and those that are not, they repeat the course again.
So does that mean that the world as we know it's going to end? Does it mean that we're going to be reaching a higher vibration and a new age of Aquarius, for
Yes.
lack of a better
Yeah, I know,
thing,
lack
is
of a better words,
happening?
right? I know that sometimes you go, "Oh, do I really wanna say it that way?" Because it's,
Yeah.
because
Well, I hear
everybody likes to say it.
music. I'm hearing the age
Yeah,
of
me too, me too.
Aquarius.
I almost feel like just getting, like, a headband and just start singing with you. I'll
Yeah,
get the
yeah.
guitar and hum a few tunes, and
So
even
is
though I don't
that
know.
what they mean, that there's like a new reality that's taking place, a new vibration, or that the earth is gonna implode and we're all gonna not be here soon? And since time doesn't exist in the spirit world, what's soon?
Yeah, yes, yes, no. If I follow that line of questioning, um, it the end of 3D as we know it, if you look at it in terms of it being a game or a school, it has its endpoint. Okay, and I've said this through a number of different channeling experiences. It's never changed. Um, that ending is around 2039. Okay, um, but that, and this is why I said yes, yes, no, because the yes, yes piece is that we are vibrating as consciousness at a higher level now than ever before, and that vibration continues to rise. And if you understand, and you understand the consciousness, how consciousness grows out of that vibration. There is a dimension called the fifth dimension, and but there's also a fourth dimension, which most people don't talk about. But there's a fifth dimension version of this world that we will vibrate into, and in this world, what that looks like in this world, in this 3D world, is that uh, we literally uh, we literally vibrate ourselves out of this game. And in this game is like, you remember how when you were a kid, maybe you would see how the rocket ship would rocket out of space, and then you'd see the camera and that piece that got you all the way up to the highest levels of the stratosphere, that it would detach and then go into the ocean. That's the image I always get, that part that's going back into the ocean per se is the 3D world that you leave behind, and this 5D world that you step into. It's a vibrational sequencing that you rise into, and this is something that most people have a bit of a challenge understanding. You Just because 5D energies are here, which are creation and integration energies, just because they're here doesn't mean that just because you showed up to the party that you get to experience 5D. And this is not to scare anybody. It's just that this is about understanding why Caleb said, it's time. It's time. You need to be the shine. You need to be the vibration. You need to be the frequency. You need to step into yourself and remember who you are, because you have to do that to integrate yourself into the higher levels of consciousness. 5D is around us right now, but it's now more than ever integrating through the grid system of this planet and through our grid systems. But you still have to remember who you are. You can resist it, and that is not necessarily a wise idea, because resisting, as they say, is futile. Okay, it just makes it harder for you to ascend. Or yeah, I knew you would probably remember that saying. But it's futile, and so it's a process of remembering. That's the initiation process of the ascension. There's an initiation process to remember who you are, and once you get through that process of remembering, the game becomes um, it opens itself up to the beauty and the magic and the mysticism of 5D. And so, to answer your question, there's that part of it that people don't focus a lot of that. I mean, they talk about 5D, but they don't focus on what that means, because it's really easy to get stuck in the other timeline that says that this 3D world is heading towards an end, because that 3D world is heading towards an end. But that doesn't mean that you have to be there to see it. Okay, and it doesn't explode. It doesn't explode. We will do a nice job of just getting rid of ourselves. Okay. And then the school gets cleaned up like every school does every summer. And a new school comes in, a new class comes in. Okay. And
So
so that's
how
all.
I understand that, help me with this, is and also when I get done with what I'm gonna say, why does everybody skip 4D? What is it like? You just go to the head of the line and you skip a grade? What's up with the 4D thing?
Hello, right? Right?
Yeah,
So
why?
I do spend a fair number of time with either my students or others explaining this. Okay. There is a 4D. After 3, there's 4. Okay. And then 4 goes into 5. You don't skip 4. And but 4 is where all the clues and riddles are. And if you don't recognize 4, you're going to miss the clues and riddles of the game. And that's where things become so extraordinarily mystical, so extraordinarily magical, such an adventure, like an adventure unlike anything you would see in Hollywood. It's because in that 4 is where all the codes, all the keys are, and people skip it. So that's why they're sitting there going, I do all this stuff and I can't figure out why I'm not getting anywhere because you skipped 4.
Mhm.
Okay.
So my perspective of all of this, and I don't get into the rabbit hole of 3D, 4D, 5D. I mean, I don't play there. I just get what I get and move on. So my perspective is we're still going to be here in the human body. We're going to be able to access higher vibrations in the 4D and the 5D. It's not like we're all going to evaporate our bodies and just be in the spirit form. Those of you that are listening, you should see Franco's face right now. I mean, he's like raising his eyebrows and going, well, but there's more to the story here. That's my perspective of it, is that we're gonna be able to do things like stop time so that your toddler can go across 5 lanes of traffic at the pickup lane at the airport and do things along those lines that people can experience, and now we just say, "Oh my god, what a miracle," or, "This was a lot of people call it coincidences. There are no coincidences in life. They're all spirit interacting with us. But it's going to be my perspective is it's going to be more apparent to more people. It's going to be more frequent. We're going to be able to access more information more easily. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes complete sense. And I'm not, and what I want to do is instead of, I'll put it this way, I'll compliment what you're saying, as opposed to try to come across a different opinion on it. Um, what what happens in as you raise your vibration is that there is there oh, this is what I'm telling you, man. This is a big story. Okay, so I'm going to try to do it all in just a few minutes here. Okay. um what happens with your what happens when you vibrate is that you literally vibrate, you do vibrate out into a new dimension, and you leave behind, depending on what you intended to do in this 3D reality, you leave behind a shell of what you had left in this 3D, and that might play itself out all the way to the end. Maybe. I'm like I saying, I'm trying to give you sort of the Reader's Digest version of this. That you literally there are references in many different places in sacred books of all kinds, that talk about how you become a ghost. There's a ghost element, meaning that you vibrate literally out of this dimension. And for a short period of time, you could literally walk through in rooms and stuff, and people wouldn't even know you were literally there. Now, that happens a lot anyway, but I'm saying they literally don't know you're there.
Okay. Last question. Why do we incarnate?
Oh, well, I will give you the answer as it relates to right now. Okay. We incarnate right now because we give ourselves, and not everybody incarnates as many times as some others. That this is a separation of 2 different types of consciousness that are on the planet right now. One that is here to support the ascension, and one that's here to actually experience the ascension. And but for those that are experiencing the ascension, they vibrate many times. They incarnate many times, because it is the way in which that they give themselves the highest chance of probability that in incarnating in one of those lives, they will actually get it. And they improve their odds, because once they get it, all aspects of themselves that are playing all these other games and all these incarnate roles will also receive that wisdom and knowledge, and they will also roll back into that one aspect of themselves, and they will ascend. That's why, to increase their chances of getting it. That's why they incarnate.
Okay. So you are fascinating, thought provoking, uh, legit. I mean, I
Thank
can
you.
feel it, legit. And this, I don't understand everything that you talk about. I would say it's above my pay grade, but it's fascinating to ponder. So everybody that's listening to this, I would imagine you, like I, are going to have to go back and listen to this a couple of times, because there's so many golden nuggets here throughout this conversation, and they're at a really high vibrational level that I'm going to need to listen to more than once to bring it down to my human intelligence vibration level. But it's certainly thought provoking, if nothing else. How can people learn more about you and your work?
I have established a website where I do offer these um, these alchemistic activations for people, and so they can become Harry Potters themselves. And that's at francoromero.com. And it's, as you step into it, it's like you're stepping into a mystical world of fantasy and play. I also have a playground, a community where we play all sorts of games with the divine child energies, which is a really big part of the Trinity of consciousness. And that's playground.francoromero.com. And so if you go to either one of those two, you can find me, you can find what I do, you can find the way that I try to activate so many people. I call them students, but they're not students. They're amazing light beings. Um, and um, and that's what I do. So that's where you can find me.
Okay. All righty. Well, everybody, like I said, there's lots for you to explore here in this conversation. In the meantime, Franco and I are sending you lots of love from me here in Sweet Home, Alabama, mwah, and from him in Minnesota. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below, and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.